Hi everyone, my name's Tereza and I'm an alcoholic. Somewhere on the highway between Santa Fe and Lubbock, I managed to pick up a cold, so excuse the gravelly voice. I first want to say thank you so much to Mamie and Linda. I really appreciate you guys have been such gracious hosts. And it's brought to mind, when I was brand new in recovery, there was this old timer who approached me and he's like, "So young lady, where's home?" And I didn't really know how to answer that at the time. And I kind of, my parents live here and my sister lives here and I'm here or there. And he said, if you do this deal, meaning the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, anywhere you go, we'll be home. And initially it was it's like, thanks, Big Bird. But, ultimately that has come to be my experience. Wherever I go, there is a community and a fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm just really grateful to be a part of it. So, to take it back, before even that pivotal first drink, some of my earliest memories of being a young girl were actually on the playground at school. I would spend recess habitually trying to organize my peers to play kickball, baseball, soccer. Big fan of team sports, and they were not interested. And I remember just, if you would stay put, if you would catch the ball, we'd all be having just such a fantastic time. And my orientation was very much, it was like, the actor trying to arrange the lights in the show, and I think it's page 61. The orientation was such that I could be happy if circumstances met my approval. And so you could say I was a control enthusiast from a young age. And when I took that first drink at a fairly young age, it was a spiritual experience. It was the first time in my life that I was awake to the present moment. I could just be. I could breathe. I could somehow the thinking, the fear that ran my life was replaced with like possibility. And it just felt like the world kind of opened up to me, and I was a part of it. And I brought my big book just so I can remember why I'm here. So very quickly, the question of whether or not I was an alcoholic wasn't something that I pondered for very long. It worked so well for me, alcohol, that very quickly, within weeks of my first drink, I was hiding booze in my closet. I was taking it to school in my backpack. I had a habit of returning from school, taking off my sneakers and getting dolled up and driving to the nearest gas station and looking for someone to buy me booze, generally a young male. And I needed my supply. It wasn't something, I have tried to at times, impart this to people who don't have this disease, that it wasn't gosh, I think a drink would be really nice right now. It was a need. It was an urgency. And life was so uncomfortable without my solution, which was alcohol. So over the course of time, come to find out I didn't hide it very well. If you guys ever question, whether you belong in these rooms, kind of listen to a loved one's account of events. Oh my God, you knew? What? But friends became concerned. They definitely noticed that my relationship with alcohol was alarming. Teachers became concerned, and that was motivation for me to hone my dishonesty, my manipulation. I was willing to step so far outside of my values to protect my disease. And so things were ugly. They got ugly pretty quick. That, spiritual experience of the first drink turned into a ball and chain pretty quick for me. And the need overpowered, we heard about the goals just falling away as the behaviors become of paramount importance. And when I was, I think, 17, I went to rehab. My motivation for going to rehab was to get out of a term paper. I thought it seemed like a great idea. The timing was perfect. No consideration of the sacrifices that my family was making to put me in rehab. Just a convenient solution to the mayhem and the wreckage that I was surrounded by, that I'd created. So I went to rehab, and I was actually in detox for longer than normal, and I remember kind of feeling like pride in that. Like it was like a badge of honor that like I was unique. And so I remember the nurse telling me like, no, we're going to keep you here for a while. And then it got kind of boring because I was like, I wanted to be part of the general population. And then it became a social event. I made friends, smoked a lot of cigarettes. And then I missed my destructive lifestyle, and I wanted to go home. And I remember Family Week begging my mother and father to take me home. There was 1 week left, and I was like, I can't do it. This place is awful. They're not teaching me anything. It's just... and my parents, like, you made a commitment, and this is where you are for now. And I wasn't big on commitments. I wasn't big on follow through, but I was stuck. And I made it through that last week, and then I drank on the way home. I was not ready. My disease continued to progress as it does. And a couple years later, it was time for me to go off to college. I had not gotten any of my essays together or put any real effort forth as far as college was concerned. It wasn't really on my mind. But then it was like, well, what are you going to do? And so I'm like, college, of course. And so I, of course, went to a place that didn't require an essay. And I remember pulling out of my driveway with my truck packed up, and I'm going to college. And it was right when Alicia Keys had come out with her amazing album. And it was this song that was like, I'm feeling a little more ready for the world and less lost. And I'm like, yeah. And I was like, I am going to college. I'm going to Durango. I'm getting out of this crappy Santa Fe town, and my life is beginning. And I was just like in that elevated, expansive place of like, that was my problem. Santa Fe, you people, problem. I'm moving on. And I get up to Durango, and it was really fun for a minute. Like, I was away from, the Hawkeyes, and I had this autonomy, and I made great use of that. And, it's so funny. So many of the women that I sponsor and have sponsored, they talk about the party. They're like, I'm just going to miss the party so much. And I'm like, wow, my party phase was brief. Like, the party for me pretty quickly turned into me closing the blinds, getting my stash, and watching the same movie over and over that I'd never made it to the end of. So it was always a surprise, It was like I'd pass out. I was someone who passed out at night, and I came to in the morning. I did not go to sleep, and I did not wake up. I had some incredible friends. I wasn't someone who only associated with people that were, worse off than me. I actually had this amazing group of people who loved me and wanted the best for me. And I was a wreck. And I had a lot of consequences, and they tried really hard to show me that I was creating this mayhem in my life. I had alcohol poisoning a number of times. I had an experience in college where 3 of my friends took shifts making sure that I was breathing because I slept for 48 hours straight after a binge. And telling me that the next day or a couple days, and going, you know, it was the whiskey. It was bad whiskey, you know, and it's like, I'm gonna get some good stuff next time. You know, but just unwilling to acknowledge that even though I knew y'all that I was an alcoholic. I knew it. But the idea of living sober sounded like a fate worse than death. And so I opted to just conceal. I wasn't proud of my alcoholism. Sure, I could drink, you know, guys 10 times my size under the table, but I felt a lot of shame about it. And it was embarrassing. And it was also of paramount importance to me that I drank. I got my first DUI while I was in college, and we heard a little bit about it, but I do vividly remember being hauled off to jail, and the arresting officer sitting down with me and giving me the time and consideration to tell me, I have a brother and he's an alcoholic. Your blood alcohol content is like nothing I've seen, and you should be dead. You, I would suggest, need to get sober. My brother is sober, and he wouldn't be alive today either if, you know, it weren't for Alcoholics Anonymous. I heard that. I was drunk. I was not in my right mind, and yet it went in. And then I called my mom because I was upset. I was in jail, and one of the things that I did as an alcoholic habitually was, when I was uncomfortable, I tried to purge those emotions onto a loved one, onto someone else, because that discomfort. It wasn't that I expected people to come through with money or with like solutions necessarily, but when I didn't want to carry that emotional consequence of my own actions, I would just lay it on you. And I had a dynamic with my mother that worked for me in that I could, you know, call her up and go, oh my God, and the shame and the guilt, you know, like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, but I did, and no. And that was a pivotal experience for me as well, because I remember trying, whether consciously or not, to get her to carry that load, and her saying to me, yes, she commented on the officer's name, it was Berry Hill, like a little hill of berries. And she said to me, when I got back on the phone, she spoke with him, and then she was talking to me, and she's like, what a great name he has. And I was like, oh, don't you understand? I am in dire straits. Like, I don't give a crap about his name. What are you going to do for me? And for the first time in our relationship, a mirror was held up to my face, and I understood for the very first time that I was responsible for my happiness. It was not up to her to make me happy. It was not up to anyone. And what I was doing I was creating this life, that wasn't working for me. I was the girl who, I lived in this beautiful place. I bought a ski pass, and I had this vision of myself that was like, yeah, I'm an outdoor girl. I'm a go-getter. It was this fabricated delusion. I went skiing once. It was like the $600 skiing adventure. And because when you go skiing, generally you wake up before 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So it wasn't really jiving with my timing or my sleep schedule. And, I remember friends saying, Tereza, gotta check out the sunset. The sunset's so beautiful. And I'd race around the house looking for my booze so that I could enjoy the sunset, and I'd miss it. I relied on booze to just function in the world, not very effectively, and to have experiences that other people could get nourishment and sustenance from. I missed those experiences because booze always took priority. I'm going to get into the recovery and make sure I'm doing okay. Okay, so I had a demonstration of the 2 paths that were ultimately available to me as an alcoholic through my grandparents. I never met my grandfather, but I was always trying to get information about him. I'm like, who was this person? And it was so interesting because both my mother and my aunt, he sat in a chair, he listened to music, it was hard to get a reading. And so what I knew of him was that he died really young from the disease of alcoholism. I also observed my grandmother as an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she had these little quotes all over her house. And she was not someone who, she wasn't promoting the program, but she lived it. And so I saw that there were these 2 routes available to me. And the truth is, before I took my last drink, I was at that dark and desperate place where I didn't know if I wanted this life. I really didn't. I was kind of, the idea of sobriety was so daunting to me that I thought maybe it was just time to kind of call it a day and draw the curtain. I was working in a fine dining restaurant, in Durango, but I was waiting tables as I was going to college, and it was definitely a very boozy scene. And I remember patrons coming in, and there was this one thing that you could order on the menu, and it was a trout, and it was deboned tableside. And every time they ordered, I was like, don't order the trout. That's so hard to do. And of course, people love this damn trout. And so I would try to debone this trout, and my hands would shake so much that no one ever tipped me when they ordered the trout. You were going to choke on a bone. It was guaranteed. So when I finally made the first approach towards Alcoholics Anonymous, it was because a phone list had been given to me by a friend. Another slight indication that you may have a problem when people are giving you AA pamphlets and phone lists over the years. But for whatever reason, I had saved this thing, and I called someone on the list. They met me at a meeting. I wasn't ready yet. I still had ideas. I still was trying really hard to look really good because I felt so crappy on the inside. And I couldn't hear a solution because my mind was still full of, well, maybe. Like, I didn't try that, so maybe I'll try that. And I was sober, I think, for, I don't know, a couple, maybe a month, which was huge for me. People laugh when I say this, but it's legit for me. I was a daily binge drinker, like, because I drank every day, and when I put booze in my body, there's no stopping me. It's a binge. That was just my personal experience. So getting a little bit of time entirely through white knuckling was extremely painful. And very shortly after having that experience and not filling that void, I went back out, and it was close to my birthday. And my roommates decided to, I didn't tell anyone that I was back out, but my roommates decided to throw me a surprise party. And they were very sweet. There wasn't a real solid understanding of, recovery or Alcoholics Anonymous, but they knew that I was like doing that. And so they got me a little 6-pack of O'Doul's, which is not a big part of, it's not any part of my sobriety or my recovery these days, but it was very sweet. Missing the point, but anyway. And then they got themselves a keg. And so everyone comes to our house. It's like party time, and I spent that entire evening in the woodshed out back pouring vodka into an O'Doul's can or bottle, And I was sure I was fooling everyone, because I was sober, but God, I needed some relief. And so that went on, thankfully, for a brief period of time. I exhausted those last few ideas, thank God. And on Halloween, my sobriety date is November 2nd of 2003. On Halloween of 2003, I was dressed as a killer bee at my fine dining job. And it's a good image. The last drink is a killer bee. I was just, it wasn't my most dramatic experience. I had many dramatic, glaring consequences. This was not a night of that. This was a night of feeling absolutely deadened, separate from the world, separate from life. Some friends from work said, hey, let's go to this Halloween party. And I declined because people were an obstacle to my drinking. I needed to get a job done, and that's what my drinking was. It was a job at this point. It was a chore, and it needed to happen. And your interference, there was no time for that. And so I remember driving home, my little antennas, and stopping at the liquor store and feeling like, I really wish I didn't have to do this. I really wish I could just go home and go to bed. It's late and I'm tired, but knowing full well that you got to do this. You have to turn here and you need to get your supply. And I did. And I drove home and I got very drunk. I was drunk the whole next day of November 1st from the drinking I'd done the night before, which was pretty typical for me. I drank every day, but that drunk just carried on. And the morning of November 2nd, I made a call that was prompted by willingness and a desire to just see if there was something else for me. I didn't know what it looked like. I had surrendered to the fact that I couldn't bring about my own solution. I had tried for years. For years I'd wake up in the morning and make deals with myself, and I meant them. It wasn't just, It wasn't BS. It was a genuine, today is a new day. I'm turning over a new leaf. I think I'll drink a smoothie. I'm going to go for a run. And this is like my new life. And inevitably, for me, it was generally within a matter of hours. I tell myself, I changed my mind. I changed my mind. And the truth of the matter is that the disease of alcoholism changed my mind. And I couldn't make a decision and stick with it on my own power. So I called the first woman, a different woman, on the phone list, and the AA phone list, and she picked up, and I just said, honestly, authentically, which were not two of my premier traits, I don't know what to do. I can't drink, and I can't not drink. So I'm between a rock and a hard place here. And she said, there's a meeting at 10. Can you make it till 10? And I knew when she said that this was someone who knew what I was up against. Because had I asked anyone who was a normal drinker, they're not going to ask if you can make it 2 hours. And the honest answer that I gave her was, I don't know. I don't know. I will try. And she said, okay, I'm going to meet you at the meeting at 10. And I go to the meeting, and she's not there yet. And I walk through the door, and it's just this wall of 50-plus-year-old men. And I'm like, I can't believe this is my life. Like, oh, made a terrible mistake. But as soon as I sat down and they opened their mouths, they told my story. And that was really powerful. The opportunity to relate, but not only to relate and identify, but to see that there was joy in these people and that they were active participants in their lives, which I was not. I remember driving on the streets and seeing like kids playing, and seeing my roommates and my friends like go for hikes and stuff, and resenting them because they were living, and I was just dead inside. I was dead. And so I saw reflected back to me people who had been where I was and were no longer there. And that was something that I had tried to affect that change in my life, and I tried everything that I could think of, and nothing had worked. So I was sober in AA in Durango for a year. I made the commitment to stay for a year. At first, I was on that, like, you hear about the pink cloud and stuff. I was feeling good. I was like, wow, this is new. And but pretty quickly, I did not get into the book. It's interesting how our stories, it's like the story itself doesn't change, but our perspective about the story changes. And I used to tell this part of the story as like, they didn't do the big book, and they didn't know about the big book. And I wasn't looking, like, I was making coffee and I was making friends, and I thought that was what the deal was, I wasn't looking for something that involved work. And so by the end of that year, I was suicidal in sobriety. And that was a really scary place to be, because in my mind, it's the last stop on the block. Like, that's it. That was my last resort. That's where you go when you have no more ideas. And oh my gosh, like, AA has failed me. And the fact of the matter is, I wasn't working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I moved back down to Santa Fe. I was not in good shape. I started going to a big book study meeting, and I was introduced to people who had a solution, and it was clear. It was clear that their lives were full, and that their hearts were full, and their willingness to share that and to pass that on was palpable. And so I started working through the big book with a sponsor, and it was rough for me at first. And I feel like sometimes in AA, so much beauty and joy comes into our lives that I sometimes feel like we don't talk about the struggles in just life, which continues to happen, even in recovery. And I had a really rough time early on. Even as I worked those steps as hard as I was like going for an AA++. I was so committed to doing it right, getting it right, and all that was, though, was my own power. It's like, if I can get this perfectly, then I'll get what I desire, you know? And I was missing the point, which you'll see is kind of a theme in my life. But I was missing the point that this is about accessing higher power. I can't do this in and of myself. I tried. I failed. I need something bigger than myself. So I persevered. I was having a real issue with gratitude early on. I felt like, this is just no fair. Like, I'm young and all my friends are still partying and I know I can't do that, but, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I kept hearing in meetings that they desperately needed volunteers to go to the state penitentiary. And at first it was like, you know, that little intuitive sense that you start to get in touch with, but you don't trust it yet, because you're like, I've made some bad decisions in my life. I don't know if that's like, is that good? Is that bad? Like, true, false? And I was like, okay, I like the idea of being of service, but that sounds like a little bit too extreme. So I shelved it, and they kept, men, women, we don't care, you know, please, we need volunteers for the penitentiary. We need volunteers. We need volunteers. And finally, it's like, okay, I'm doing this. And at that point in time, it's a men's prison. The only person who was taking the message out there was the woman who became my sponsor years later, an 80-year-old mother of 3, grandmother to 4, was taking the message out to the men's prison. And so I went through the orientation and I started doing that, and I did that for 6 years every Monday. And it was one of the most pivotal points in my recovery, because what it forced me to do was to get really clear on my primary purpose. Why was I there? And I wore the same sweatpants every day. I didn't wear makeup. It was like I was there for one reason, and it was to carry the message and to share my experience as authentically as I could. And I don't know how many men got the message. I don't know how many took it with them to wherever they were going or not going. But I know that about 5 years into doing that, I was in the parking lot of the grocery store, and I hear my name, and it was one of the men with his new wife and his baby daughter. And he said, and it still just gives me chills. He came up to me and he just said, I'm sober and grateful. And he just said, thank you. It wasn't me. There's a power that flows through the willingness to give what we've been so freely given. And I've experienced that over and over again. And what it does for me, though, when I see someone having an experience with these steps, is it reminds me that I'm not running the show, because I never know what the results are going to be. And it reminds me that there's higher power at work here. And it's a continuous gift, you know, every time I can see that and feel that. At 10 years sober, things got really hard again. I had experienced a great deal of, you know, of joy and what it is to have a life of meaning and purpose in the program. And then I the last 5 years have been faced with some health challenges. And it's been interesting because it's brought me to initially I was in this place of just, why? I'm doing everything right. And how could this, like, this isn't my vision for me. And what's happened over the course of these last couple years is I've been brought from a place of believing in higher power, building that belief, to reliance on higher power. And it took me a long time to get there, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. It's been a process. And there were times when I would sit in AA meetings and I'd feel like a fraud, because everyone would be talking about, the higher power, the power of God, oh my God, my life is just incredible. And I'd be like, I am shit scared and I don't know the next right move. And certainly something must be wrong with me because I'm in that state. And but what I've been brought back to is every time I find myself in pain and desperation, the common denominator is that I've fallen back into self-sufficiency, self-will. And I am identified with ego. On some level, I have subscribed to this idea that I am this, whatever that may be. And what this illness, the gift of this, and that's not me trying to wrap it up in a nice little bow, it has been a gift in my life because of where it's brought me to. But it's like, your hair's falling out, Tereza. Who are you now? Are you your hair? Are you how you look? It's like, oh, I guess I thought I was because this is really painful, but no, I'm not. And you can't show up for your son the way that you want to and envisioned. Is that who you are? Or, there was a period of time where I was in bed a lot, and I remember my sponsor saying okay, so in bed, how can you access higher power? How can you be of service? And how can you find some element of joy? That's your project. And I started making little handmade, wonky, template-free teddy bears. And all of a sudden I'm giving everyone a little teddy bear. But I am having a grand old time. I'm in bed and it sucks, but there's a way to be in difficult situations and have gratitude and purpose. It's I used to believe that to have two emotions at once made you crazy. That's a crazy person. They're happy and sad. What's wrong with them? And now it's it's part of the richness of my life and my experiences, that I can have experiences that overlap and may not make sense. But today I have an understanding and a belief that life is happening for me. It's not happening to me. And even those experiences that challenge everything I think I am or should be, I really do. I have faith and belief that it's bringing me to the next place in my journey where I can be of maximum service, if I choose to stay awake, if I choose to stay conscious, and to implement those resources that have been given me in these rooms. I have an incredible life of abundance. I have an 8-year-old son who is just awesome and hilarious, and he and I talk about, I pick him up from school and stuff, and I realized really quick that there's kind of a standard rote answer when you ask an 8-year-old, how was your day? Fine. And so I started to kind of change it up, and I'm like, okay, so what made you laugh today? What, was whatever. And then it's how's your candle? And we talk about this little inner candle. And that's what I have today as a result of this program. I have a little inner candle, and I now know how to keep that lit. And it's adorable to hear an 8-year-old be like, "It's lit!" It's like, good. But there's that dialogue, and I couldn't have been a parent who cares or even quite considers what's going on inside of you. Sure, I could have monitored your behavior and kept you from walking into the road or something, but as far as being able to share a spiritual journey, I wouldn't have been capable of doing that. I have a relationship with my husband that is based on growth. I mean, every relationship prior to him was like, I will use you, I will lie to you, and I will discard you. And I learned in these rooms how to enter any situation with the question, what can I give versus what can I get? And that is a spiritual practice, because I got to admit, my default is still, I'm like, what am I going to get out of that? And when I hear that, it's like one of those red flags, like, that's not why you're here, And the way that I keep myself current in my program is not to just confine that thinking to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, but the grocery store, when something's a little, on the top shelf and you see someone struggling to get, like, how can I give in this situation? Or, opening the door, giving a smile. Like, it's simple, and it's necessary for me to stay sober. So I didn't look at my time when I actually got up here, so I keep looking at the time like that means something to me, but I don't know when I started. Anyone know? 5 more minutes? 45. Whoa! I'm running out of material. Well, let me just be quiet for a minute. I speak at a recovery center fairly often, and it's a format where you share your experience, strength, and hope, and then they're allowed to ask questions. And oftentimes, one of the questions that I get is, it's like, how do you stop lying? Which is a fantastic question. For me, I was a career liar. It was a very integral part of my manipulation. And my life became so small when I was drinking that I needed to fabricate a life that would potentially impress, because my real life wasn't going to do that. And I was the person who, riding up the chairlift was like, to perfect strangers, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm up here skiing with my brother, and I don't have a brother, but I would just lie about whatever. It was like inconsequential, but I just was like, I don't know who I am or what I'm about, so I'm going to paint a picture that is not legit. And early on, working with my sponsor, again, another indication that she knows the disease of alcoholism well. She said to me, so if you're anything like me, you're going to lie to me. And I'm like, oh, I wouldn't dare. It's like, why? And she was like, so we can start the process of honesty right here and now in this dynamic. And what you can do is you can tell me when you told me a lie. And I'm like, because I'm someone who builds cities on my lies. Like, it's a lot to keep track of. And this idea that I could default to that behavior and then come clean, and that she could help me build a new way of being, was revolutionary. Like that, and it helped me so much. And it's like, what I tell these folks at this recovery center is like, that's been a process for me. I didn't come into AA and I wasn't rendered white as snow. Like, I have defects of character. And, you know, in retrospect, watching a lot of these defects, they have served me, and then they don't. And I trust that ultimately, in God's time, they'll be removed. They'll either be used or removed. And therefore, it's like, it's not up to me. I'm really grateful for the women that I sponsor, who keep me current in my program, who keep me honest. I'm reminded, I met someone just the other day who's in a lot of pain, and she's in that phase of trying to figure it all out. And I had that experience in that phase, and what I learned through sponsorship is not only is that approach to recovery not useful, it's actually detrimental in my experience. Because what it does is trying to figure it all out and put our heads together, and it fosters this delusion that somehow if you and I can just put our heads together, we can affect change. And again, the point is, I don't have that power. And so when I find myself in that position or in that inclination, prayer and meditation is my go-to. And sometimes it takes me a long time to get there, and it takes me pain. And sometimes, it's relatively swift, and I'm acutely aware of the miracle of that. So I think that's what I've got to share with y'all today. And I owe you all everything. Thank you for being home, and for showing up and living authentically. I feel like that's the greatest gift we can give each other, to share our messy humanness and walk each other on this journey. So thank you.